You should just do it forever. Just always just press record from the beginning.
Yeah, those are always like my favorite starts to every podcast. It's just like, and I always love like when they have guests, like the guest has to know like what the format of the podcast is. And it's always, are we on? Are we recording? Like I didn't know we were recording. Oh yeah, the podcast started. Like
Yeah. They clearly know ahead of time because they probably are presented with questions that you want to be asked, questions you don't want to be asked, that kind of thing.
no,
It's
I like to think everybody just flies by the seat of their pants. It's all improv all the time,
It would be nice. It'd be a lot easier. It'd be a lot more honest and truthful.
right? Like that's how we're gonna start doing it now. We're not gonna prep whatsoever. We're just gonna
I have
gonna
no
gonna
clue what
see
we're going to talk about today. We're just going to screw around until something comes up.
gotta see what kind of shit show we can come up with. It's perfect.
Yeah.
Because I feel like that's the perfect way to like model like a business. Because like it's one thing if it's just a podcast, but we're like, hey, like you should come want to work with us. We clearly know our stuff and we clearly put in preparation, except for the podcast. Like that's the time that we would have prepped this podcast. We're prepping your workouts and your nutritional plan. That's how much we care. That's
I mean, well, that's honestly kind of factual. I was literally waiting for you to log on, like preparing for a class up. So it's not like at all that that's facetious. That's actually true.
I mean, I think that's actually a point in our favor. Like, I don't ever want anybody to think, oh, look at all the work they put in that podcast. Like, there's no way they put that much effort into to coming up with plans. Where do they have the time? Their podcast is so well researched.
Yeah. Well, I mean, that's kind of the funny part of it, or I don't know, funny part of it or of all of it is that the amount of time that we've put into building our knowledge bases around these topics that we talk about makes it to where it is kind of more off the cuff because I've talked about it.
Right. Like, yeah, it's not so much prep now. It's yeah, the 15 plus years in the field of yeah, been my prep.
Oh, never know. But oh, speaking of prep, did you ever get your bands?
I did not. So like I'm doing a different program right now where I'm not using bands. So I have not reordered them just out of sheer spite. Like
Sustainable.
because so yeah, really, yeah. It's I use my ex brother-in-law's Amazon Prime. So like it's a matter of like, well, all right, I gotta ask him like did you get the email?
Did you get the confirmation that this product was stolen from me?
Right. Yeah. From somewhere that's an hour and a half away from you. That
Yeah. Um, no, I liked your post. What did you do to return from the holidays? So, for those out there that are unaware, this is being recorded post Thanksgiving, just immediately post Thanksgiving. Um, and we had put out our tips for a happier, healthier Thanksgiving on Thanksgiving Day. So, hope all of you checked out that podcast. If not, go back. It's probably still relevant because this is the holiday season. Um, but as far as preparing and getting back into the swing of things, I completed the deadlift jack that I've been meaning to fix.
oh hell yeah! All right.
So I've had the wood sitting in there, and I finally was able to have time to sand it and put it all together. Uh, Part of the joke we were making about it, my in-laws were here. They're like, "Oh, did you get your project done?" It's like, "Yeah." And my wife said it probably would have taken him 15 minutes to do it, but he had his kids helping him, so it took him over an hour to complete it.
They were quote helping. Yeah,
Right.
it's a nice help.
The power tools and toddlers don't really mix. They shouldn't really be used together. But luckily, I was just using a power drill in this instance, so
I mean, I thought that's why you had two kids. Like, if something happens, like
yeah, exactly, exactly.
it's next man up, right? Isn't that why I have
Right.
people have multiple children? This is why I don't have kids. All right, that's
Well, I mean, the but they understand what is supposed to be happening. What they dislike is taking turns and waiting on the next one to complete their turn.
I
Uh,
get it. I don't have patience for anything either. I don't want to have somebody working on a set with me or like have to wait in line at the grocery store. So yeah,
right. Well,
maybe
that's the
may
whole purpose of the deadlift jack is that I can spend less time in between sets, technically. Uh, but kind of what we're talking about today. Our last episode was on protein, in our nutrition and fitness simple. We could just call this the KISS series. Keep it simple, stupid. Um, as far as the next several weeks and prior to this going on. Um, last time we talked about protein. So this week we're supposed to be talking about um, back exercises.
Correct. Because we did yeah, we talked about chest a few weeks ago or 3 weeks ago or whatever. Because we had Thanksgiving, and hey, can you tell we record several of these at a time? Like,
Yeah.
I feel like it's like the marathon tapings of like the wrestling shows where you're like, hey, like or like WWF back in the day or AEW during the pandemic or yeah, WCW like, oh, wait, this is 6 weeks worth of so 6 weeks ago we just got. I have no clue.
Yeah.
Like yeah, so yeah, back exercises. Yeah, so there you go with your deadlift. So
Yeah, man. Gotta get prepped to get a big back. And a big back will help you with basically every other lift, which is crazy, focusing on the posterior chain. Seriously.
absolutely. And yeah, and it's good for just everyday activities of daily living. It's good for just what we're doing right now as we're sitting here to have proper posture and to take pressure off that lower back. Because I know both you and I have had some fun lower back issues. Mine's actually super tight today, so this is very appropriate.
Good times, good times. Um, I I think the last time that I had to go see a doctor for my back was like 2014, I think. And if you go back and listen to our nutrition and fitness book recommendations, I mentioned a book in there by a physical therapist, and um, that physical therapist recommends focusing on your posterior chain for like they say a 2 to 1 ratio. So like 2 pull variations to 1 push variation with your exercises. That way you can make sure that your posterior chain is strong enough to help you with everything.
And that's actually very similar to how I train. So for 90% of the people I work with, and for myself included. So I like that. I haven't read that book yet. It's on my Amazon wish list. It's probably going to be a holiday week reading for me. So yeah, no, it's yay, point in my favor that somebody else agrees with me.
Yeah, and I advocate for that now, especially having done all those things to fix a lot of my issues. Like I was very front loaded, and that's not from like typically, you'll hear people say, oh, it's because you like look in the mirror kind of thing. I think it's just from like the genetic perspective that everybody's body is unique, and my probably is more propensated on that's not even actually a word, but either way, like
It is now.
and it is now. Now it is. I will randomly add it to the Webster's. But um, like my quads have always kind of been dominant on the quads. And like triceps take over everything. Same with the shoulders. Hence, if you go back and listen to our favorite muscle groups to work, that's how that ends up for me. But I really needed to do a lot of work on my hamstrings, my glutes, and especially my lower back. That was like one of
And
the
like you're not alone. That's so much of the general population, and we're kind of like you said, kind of genetically predisposed to be that way. Number one, and then with the way our lives are, we're disposed to be that. As we sit here right now, as I sit here, and this is where like I mentioned this, and I start adjusting and making sure my posture is good because I know if you were watching, you could see that it wasn't. After sitting here for 9 hours already today, like we have that tendency to kind of round out. The lower back is taking all this pressure as we're sitting. The glutes are not developed because we're sitting all day. So yeah, you're definitely in good company, and that's the reason. Yeah, a lot of posterior chain training for me personally, and from a lot of clients I work with.
Right. So there is a big, classic kind of thing in bodybuilding is dividing the body into 5 muscle groups in general. And so it's like chest, back, legs, shoulders, arms, 5 classic groups. And so moving through our Keep It Simple Stupid series here with the back, um, the back is labeled in general, but unlike the chest, when we were talking about the chest with like it has a couple of insertion points, there's a lot of muscles on the back.
Absolutely. And a lot of times that erector spin A, especially like people do not focus a lot on the lower back. There's a lot of stuff for the lats, of course. Some stuff for mid trapezius, some stuff for the rhomboids. But yeah, a lot of times people just completely neglect that lower back, and people want that awesome six pack with the abs. So and they never do anything to develop that opposing muscle group.
Yeah, and I think when you think about the development of your abs, if you can work your lower back to be well developed, it helps pull that back in. So that way, like
Right. Like you have better posture, so therefore, yeah, everything's going to be nice and tucked in and
you'll
nice and
see the
tight.
definition of your abs a lot better if you're nice and tight and snug on your trunk than if your belly is sticking out because you've neglected your posterior chain. And that ends up being more of an anterior pelvic tilt, but that's a different topic.
Right. You have that nice lordotic curve, and yeah, it's like okay, like even if you're not, overweight or carry stuff in the midsection, it looks that way. So
Right. So if we had to go top to bottom, we've been talking a lot about the erector spinae, or deeper the quadratus laborum in there in that lower back. Um, but if you go top to bottom, so typically people think about um, when you're looking at your shoulders or think about what's right next to your neck. That muscle, that big triangle at the top of your shoulders, is actually more of a trapezoid shape.
ooh, is that why it's the trapezius?
Right, yeah, and it's on your back, not on your shoulders, right? So, some people will loop in, I've seen the traps divided into as many as 4 different pieces.
Depending on the literature you look at, it's either three or four. Yeah.
Yeah,
I typically I program it as three. Upper, mid, low, because it's easier to do that way.
it's easier to think about that way too. Your back primary motion of movement is pulling things, so whether it's pulling things from the floor, pulling things down from above you. So, we were talking about activities daily living. Let's say you had to pick up a box that's above your head and you have to bring it out and down. Your back muscles are doing part of the work to keep you stable, especially if it's an object that is, um, I don't know, some amount of weight that is difficult for you to move. Like if it's, like right now it's the holiday season. I had to get down some Christmas decorations the other day, and I had to lift them up over, right? So I'm pressing with my shoulders
with
over and
the overdeveloped anterior deltoid. Yep, that's
over the belt, and then I had to bring them back down. But I had to be careful with it because it's fragile objects inside, right? So you're slowly moving it down. So that's mostly my back controlling that motion down.
yeah, it's helping kind of pump the brakes to make sure you're not just like, oh, here we go.
Yeah.
So
So
you're not lifting like a lot of people lift in the gym. So that's a perfect real world example of like if you were doing like a lot of people try to do weights. It's just, oh, and then oh, why do I have shattered ornaments all over my floor?
right, and especially on like the back pulling down as a concentric movement. But if you're doing anything that's lowering an object from above your head down with your hands, that's going to be the eccentric phase of your back. Um, in that part of the movement, your back's
And we've talked about the importance of that ad nauseum on previous podcasts. So there you go. There's real world application for why your training should be the way it should be inside the gym.
right. So a lot of pull motions there. When it comes to the traps, upper, mid, lower, and then your lats, is that big piece of your back that creates kind of the wing look when you're looking from the front to the back, or if you're turning.
He looks like a bat, like a bat. Like I just
Yeah,
always think of the scene, and if anybody's never seen it, Pumping Iron. That's I think we've alluded to it in the podcast before, where Arnold's just sitting there being a shithead
yeah.
about Lou Ferrigno on stage, like with his lats. He looks like a bat.
um, I mean that's like one of the things. Like, what's his name? Dorian Yates, the Shadow. Like that guy's back was gigantic. That was nuts. And that was mostly a lat spread, right? So the
Yep.
lat spread is a classic bodybuilding pose where you try to make your lats look as big as they possibly can. Um, but to get that big development, that also helps create the quote unquote V taper when people are looking. So that way your body shape looks like a V from your waistline up because your lats are swinging out. Um, But there is a thing that also happens that I find frequently annoying. We like to call it ILS, or invisible lat syndrome, where people really that feel like they have really big lats. They just walk around, their arms are spread out really far, but they're like the only reason why your arms should be spread out like that because your lats are pushing against your arms like that.
Well, it's always the guys with the t-shirts cut so far down below too. That, like, you've got to be jacked for that to like look cool. Like,
Yeah,
yeah, Dwayne Johnson walks in the gym, he can wear whatever the hell he wants. But cool, but like otherwise, like you
yeah,
walk around like that with your shit cut all the way down to the sides, or like
yeah.
poncho styles even better. It's like, come on, man.
I don't understand the point. I mean, I don't get it.
Good.
Like,
It's usually people who are just like really skinny. That's the best part. It's like, dude, I don't want to see your ribs.
yeah, it's like look
Like
at all these abs I have. You don't have abs. You're just really skinny. You don't have any meat on your bone. But I mean, either way, so development of the lats. So my favorite trap exercise is a shrug. So what's your favorite trap
I
exercise?
mean, there's really only so okay. Are we dividing the trap into three different spots, or are we just
Oh yeah,
doing
do you
one?
want to? We can divide it into three different spots. You want to go upper, mid, lower?
So if we go up, or yes, like there's really only so much you can do. Like you were talking about deadlifts. Deadlifts are absolutely going to secondarily work the traps. But yeah, shrugs, because yeah, you can pull a lot of weight. You feel like a badass. Like stand there, you're the asshole that
Face.
stands there right at the dumbbell rack and holds them right. You can be that guy. If we're going mid trapezius, so one that I've done lately, instead of naming the stuff that I would usually name, I'll name this one. It's kind of a bent over shrug, for the lack of a better term, of being able to just grab a barbell or grab dumbbells, bend over, and squeeze the mid
I
trapezius.
gotcha.
I always tell people to envision like having a tennis ball or trying to crack the peanut or whatever with your
Good point.
scapula. So yeah, so boom, right there. So that's a great one too. And if we're going lower trapezius, which very few people ever isolate, and they need to because muscle and balance, because it's the reason everybody looks like this. Grabbing that lat pull down bar and just kind of the depression pull downs of squeezing the
Yeah,
scapula down, holding, and then back
I remember the last time I did one of those.
up. I actually did them last week. It was the first time in a long time I did them.
Yeah, those are a tricky one, dude. Like to especially get right. Like I think about it with face pulls. That's a different exercise for a different muscle group, but um I think that might be the easiest way for somebody to visualize it in a sense. So with a face pull, when you grab the rope, if you're using a rope handle, which would be my recommendation for a face pull, um, your thumbs would be pointed up on the rope when you grab the rope. But for a face pull, it goes the opposite direction. And you, even with just a rope handle or a straight bar, like Matt is mentioning, just that small depression, it's not even very much. Like if you can feel your shoulder blade move up and down, that's all that happens. Like your arm isn't pulling on the weight, it's just the force of your shoulder blade pulling down. That's what's
And,
causing.
and that's actually the way a lot of times that I'll cue people who are having trouble filling the engagement, filling the mind muscle connection with the lats. If we start doing a lat pull down, a lot of times people are just kind of yanking using the biceps. I'm like, hey, I don't really feel it in my back. I'll have them start doing that. And they realize, oh, there's the back engagement right there. And then we can depress and then actually go into the lat pull down. So I really love that exercise for a million different reasons.
Yeah. And then for the lats, my favorite exercise, or the simplest way just to isolate it, would be just a lat pull down.
Lat pull down, I love. As far as I was trying to think of different stuff because I knew we would both say, lat pull down and this and that. My favorite variation that I've been doing a lot lately is doing a one arm dumbbell row, but making it closer to an activity of daily living. Because your typical one arm dumbbell row, stick that knee up on the bench, the hand up on the bench, and you're cranking out the rows.
Mhm.
When in real life do you ever find yourself with a knee up on something and pulling like that? So what I like to do is to stagger my stance, keep both feet on the floor, use the bench to brace, and then pull the dumbbell up. Because you find a lot of times activities of daily living, I'm going to pick something up off the floor, I'll brace myself, grab it, boom, right there. It's that modified dumbbell row.
Yeah, or like a suitcase carry, that kind of
Yep, yep.
thing. But to make your variation, more complicated.
Here I was trying to make it simple and make it closer to activity daily living, but
But
wait, there's
no,
more.
well, no, this is the that still is like an activity daily living thing. Um, so if you have a band, if you have access to a band, really lightweight band, you
If
don't
somebody didn't steal your bands off your doorstep.
but it's still and you don't need a heavy band. Like there's very little, but like a really thin, like you could use a TheraBand for this, right? Um, put it at a low spot close to the floor. Like you could tie it if you had the doorstop attachment or whatever, you close the door towards you and you put it behind it, you put a band on that. Or if you're at the gym, you can wrap it around the base of the dumbbell rack. Bend over like Matt's saying with your hand on the bench and pull it from there. So that way the weight, the resistance gets greater as it gets to your waistline. That is going to be really assembling a real world application where when you reach out for something in the initial pull, you're getting the strength of your whole back. But as you fully contract your back, it's going to get harder to get it closer to your body. So if you're pulling something off of a shelf, when you initially pull something, it's okay because your body's probably arched forward. But as it starts getting more upright and you're pulling that weight closer to you, it gets harder to pull into you. And that's because it's more of your back working. Um, you can also do that with the dumbbell. Like you put the band around a dumbbell, so that way it puts your arm into that forced arc motion. That works.
You're in full band mode lately. I love it. That's
Dude, man, I got like I well, so for I was actually just funny. I was laughing about it. Yesterday I showed somebody had pulled up these on Google Photos. I was like scrolling through my old photos. We got our bench and bands and power blocks in 2017. So for 2017 until 2021, that was all the fitness equipment we had or at home was bands and power blocks up to 50 pounds. So I've done
you
a
figured out
ton of
all kinds of ways. Forgot some progressive overload.
right. Yeah. So, I mean, I've been band heavy for that amount of time. In the last year, though, I haven't really used the bands much because I finally got access to a barbell plate. So it's like, woo, back to the Jades. Um, but yeah, no, don't worry. I'm gonna talk about more about accommodating resistance in after December. I gotta get up to 900 pounds first.
There you go. You reached that goal.
But lower back, simple exercise. Favorite one, Superman's body weight exercise, and that's an ISO hold exercise. I like to. You can everybody out there, if you listen to this, you can Google it. It's really easy to find the exercise. Basically, you lay flat on your stomach and lift up your hands and your legs simultaneously. Hold it for any amount of time. Lower your hands and your feet back to the floor. Boom. That's one rep. To make it harder, spread your hands and your feet further away from your body. If they're in line with your body, it's okay. You get further out there, you have to hold them out. That's you start working a little bit harder
Yep.
to hold that in there.
Changing that lever length, yeah, it makes it a lot of fun. Yeah,
But
mine's a similar variation of that. I like the alternating swimmers, so kind of starting out in that same position and going opposite arm with opposite leg, and actually doing moving contractions with that. I love that one a lot.
yeah,
And then do a set of that, say a set of 20 with that, and then hold a Superman. Yeah, nice little lower back burn.
if you have access to um, weights, even if it's just like my example earlier, that was just bench and power blocks. If you position yourself, this is again lower back kind of thing, so that way your shoulders are just off the bench, like your mostly your upper body and lower is still flat on the bench. Even if your legs are like kind of dangling off, you can pick up like any kind of weight, get it close to your shoulders, out in front of you, just underneath your chin, and arch yourself back, and that'll give you a similar kind of effect if you need to be kind of more off the ground if you can't get flat on the ground. But those are really simple exercises, I think, honestly, to be able to be effective with your back.
Absolutely. Yeah, I'm all about keeping it simple, and especially like as you're trying to establish a foundation. Like, I think so many people with their programming try to overcomplicate it. Like, Like there's a lot to be said for the greatest hits.
Yeah,
You're deadlifting. We're talking about rows. We're talking about lat pull downs. We're talking about super bats. Like just super simple, effective motions that
yeah,
resemble activities of daily living that will strengthen that posterior chain that will make sure you don't have muscle imbalances.
yeah. So you guys out there, what are your favorite back exercises? Everybody's got a different one. I'm not going to push deadlift on anybody. It's a hard, complicated exercise. High risk.
I'm not gonna either because like I was having this conversation with Ryan off air a couple weeks ago. Yeah, like he inspired me to do deadlifts even though I've had two different physical therapists tell me not to with some of the back issues that I've had. But so yeah, listen to medical professionals. Don't do as I say and not as I do.
Yeah, high risk, high reward. But definitely high on both those things. So either way, what's your favorite exercise out there? And like we say every week, maximize every bite.
And especially with what we talked about this week, maximize every rep.